people who do not attend meetings.
Thank you. So we are meeting every other, so we're meeting odd number of months. So that would be your January, March, May, that's this month. We meet the second Wednesday of each month. We are currently meeting at Trinity Lutheran Church. We start at 6:30 p.m. We do run a little long just because we are so small. It gets a little intimate, so we get a little bit flexible with our time. But we also cover quite a bit of information in that time. You get to meet with code compliance. You get to meet with TPD. Sometimes we have guests that come through from county or different community members. So it's a good way to find out what's going on in the neighborhood besides on Facebook scanner pages, which is not really healthy for understanding how neighborhoods are. So we invite you to come in, even if you just come in once a year. We do a potluck, or we're currently doing potlucks every November. It's a great way to come out and meet your neighbors. So thank you.
Good job.
Thank you. Okay, so the whole goal of tonight is going to be to answer kind of these questions. Where have we been and how do we get here? So we're going to look at there will be some images from the 2003 neighborhood plan, kind of talk about some of that context. Look at the neighborhood health indicators. That is something that the city planning department does every 3 years, where we look at neighborhood health indicators. We'll touch on those. Where are we at now? So existing conditions, you may have seen the maps that are in the back. Those are my interpretation of existing conditions, but again, I want to hear from you all as well. And then where are we going? So this is going to be the development of the 2025 Historic Oldtown Neighborhood Plan, and that will include projects that are funded through the city's Dream 1 initiative, and then some unfunded infrastructure projects as well, so that Dreams 2, Dreams 3 can be applied for in the future. So what is Dreams 1? It's a city program that you have to apply for and be awarded, so again, congratulations on that. But it provides $1.4 million in infrastructure funds to a neighborhood, $150,000 in utility funds, and then $330,000 in housing and urban development funds, HUD. So there's income qualifications that come with those funds, and $330,000 may sound like a lot, $1.4 million may sound like a lot. Those are not large numbers. So we'll touch on this later, but that's why we need a steering committee to help kind of guide where these funds will be spent. Dreams 1 process, so we're in the plan year. This will go till September is typically a goal. The second year is going to be when engineering kind of takes over with that part, and they will design the infrastructure projects. Housing will start reaching out for where funds can be spent there, kind of checking on some of those income-based things. And then year 3 is really when we can start looking for implementation. So, giving you an idea kind of what this looks like. So these are maps from Historic Holiday Park. This was the 2023 Dreams 1 awardee. You're going to see 4 condition maps that are very similar to those on the back wall. And then you're going to see one that's got the light purple and the black color there. So when you look at these maps, the darker the color tends to indicate worse conditions. So what you do is you take all of those condition maps and you put those together into a target area concept map. So that's just basically overlaying 4 different variables to come up with where the areas of the most need are in a neighborhood. These blocks, so you're going to see, go to this next slide, you've got a 1, 2, 3, 4 on this. So this is something else the steering committee helps guide, is what are the blocks? You kind of want to keep them in a contiguous area. It's kind of a blooming effect. So again, we kind of talked about $1.4 million and $330,000. It's not enough money to change a whole neighborhood. So you want to try and impact as much good in select blocks. You kind of have the broken window theory. Things don't look good on one property, it starts to spill over and over. So if you can really stabilize a couple of blocks, so whether it's the first target area, the second, and then spend those funds that way. Dreams 1 infrastructure project. So this is how so at the time it was 1.7 million for Historic Holiday Park, but this is the number of projects they had implemented. So I believe there was 19 total that they got implemented or were trying to get implemented through Dreams 1. So that's kind of what we're looking at. All of these different lines. Blue is sidewalks, red is curb and gutter, green is, I believe, a mill and overlay. There's some alley projects that were unfunded, but these are all projects that can be done through Dreams 1. And again, we want to give you more than just what we can fund now, but projects that can be funded in the future through Dreams 2 and Dreams 3. in the very back of that, putting numbers to every project itself. So this is going to be in the implementation chapter of the neighborhood plan. This is what that process kind of looks like. This is kind of the part that you can carry away year after year and apply for projects on top of the other sections, which have some great goals, guiding principles, things like that. The process and timeline, so we're having our kickoff now. We are starting a little bit later than we normally do, but we will have these committee meetings through spring and summer, and then there will be a final meeting, which the goal is going to be August, September here. Just depends on how frequently people are willing and able to meet and how many of these people we can get into the room. We invite PD, Parks and Rec. There's a lot of different folks we can invite, and part of that's catered to what that steering committee wants to hear from with the city as well, and how we can organize that. And then August, September, we'll have another, everyone will receive a mailer again. We'll have another meeting probably here or at the high school. And then September, October, this would go to Planning Commission and the governing body for approval. This is part of our comprehensive plan, so this is a actual element that is adopted by the governing body as well. So outside of the infrastructure projects, what goes into the neighborhood plan, neighborhood profile. So history of the neighborhood. This neighborhood has a lot of history dating back to very early on in Topeka's history. Demographics, so we're going to look at those population trends, how things have been changing over since the last plan was in 2003. We have data all the way back to 1990. Vision, goals, guiding principles. This is the part that I would love to have input from neighborhoods. This is always kind of a tough one to say, here's a goal or here's a guiding principle. What do these next bullet points look like? Future land use plan. So on that back wall, there is an existing land use and there is a future land use map. Future land use map is, again, part of the comprehensive plan. It kind of helps guide long-term development in a community by saying what we would like to see. We would like to have input from the neighborhood as well. Revitalization strategies, so this is where we can get pretty broad, pretty specific, whatever the neighborhood kind of wants to get into there. But parks and open space, community building, we kind of touched on the target area strategies and some neighborhood-wide strategies. And then implementation, infrastructure projects, how that will be spent. So just a reminder, there were 2 sign-in sheets back there. The one on the left was if you were just signing up to let us know you came to this initial meeting. The one that was on the right is the steering committee sign-up. So if you would like to be contacted for this, you can reach out to me later if you don't sign up tonight. But if you sign into that, either leave an email or a phone number, I can contact you to let you try and start organizing when our next meeting will be. So introduction to existing conditions. So we're going to touch on neighborhood health, zoning, what is the current zoning, what are the land uses, housing conditions, crime, and owner occupancy, and infrastructure. So neighborhood health, I said that this is something the city does every 3 years. So neighborhood health is basically taking 5 different categories. Some of these are from the census, some of this comes from the Topeka Police Department, some of this is from the appraiser. So we have persons in poverty, Part 1 crimes, average residential property value, boarded and unsafe structures, and I'm blanking on the other one right now, but that's why we have this slide. Single family home ownership. So this started in 2000 and tracked from then to now. So these indicators have not changed a ton, and part of that is so we have some integrity to track the neighborhoods in the long term. So going back to this map, the dark red is what we consider intensive care. The pinkish red area is at risk, and then the light blue is outpatient. So outpatient, there's also a dark blue category that is not on here that you can see a little west and north of the neighborhood as well. That is what you are striving for, but really if you can get the dark red and pink areas into a light blue, that's also a great goal. But you start to dig into these numbers a little bit to understand why those things have changed. So step over here. This is a composite score, similar to that purple map we saw earlier. This is taking all of these variables and putting them into one base. So what you can see is there has been a lot of the pink for a lot of the history of the neighborhood. You did have one block group that came to outpatient, but you've had one of those that's kind of gone to now. We see that a lot with this information. So poverty is a tough one to track. There's a census every 10 years. If you do something every 3 years, you rely on something called the American Community Survey. It's a sampling from the census. It's great, it's not perfect. So you'll see things 2017 to 2020. You see some large swings in poverty when you didn't have a census to kind of fall back on that information. Same thing with 2023. You drop from 29% to 14%. But then you see another block group that increases quite a bit. So it's not always perfect, but it's a great way to track long-term things. That is one to highlight. The drop from 29% to 14% is going to be one of the biggest things that's going to kick a neighborhood here. Another thing that is not highlighted in green, but I would like to say and call out, something a lot of neighborhoods are experiencing, the appraised values, so the average residential property value, that number went up almost $40,000. That's a huge amount in 3 or 4 years, and that's something a lot of neighborhoods are experiencing. This other one highlighted here is board and unsafe structures. So this is kind of a twofold thing. The city is a little bit more aggressive with how it is going about identifying and having structures that are boarded up, demoed, things of that nature. So that number may jump up. It's not always a bad thing if it means the city is doing something about trying to get rid of a troublesome property. So that also could mean that you have a certain number that are boarded up, but then they get torn down. So that's why you see such a great fluctuation there. I forgot to say this at the beginning. There's a ton of information. If you have any questions, please feel free to stop me and just say, I don't understand this, or can you explain this further? Sorry. Okay, so this is our zoning map. Big takeaway here, there's 3 arterial roads that form kind of hard boundaries for this neighborhood. So 6th, 10th, and Topeka Boulevard. Zoning is what helps guide land use and what is also allowed within a neighborhood. So arterials tend to have a more intense use. That red you see are commercial uses. The blue that has a variety of different polka dots, those are going to be your office uses. So 6th and 10th, Topeka Boulevard, those have a lot of those. Then as you kind of transition it more into the center of the neighborhood, you have a lot of multifamily. So R2, realize this is small, that's why they have the maps in the back if you need a closer view. R2 is a single family zoning district. Anything that starts with an M is a multifamily. O's are office, C commercial, D is for downtown. MS is the medical services, and then a PUD is a planned unit development, which can allow for a lot of things. So, but the big takeaway here, as you transition away from those arterials, it tries to get a little less intense with those uses that are allowed within those zoning districts. But this neighborhood's a little different. You've got a large medical area. There's a lot of apartments that have been around for a while in this neighborhood as well. But R2 is actually the most prominent zoning district in this neighborhood. Existing land use. So going into even more detail, so we go out and we inventory all the properties. The county appraiser has these generally identified as well. Sometimes they're not right, but we can tweak that. So this may not be perfect. Sometimes this is tough to catch, but basically this is putting each individual property into a category that talks about what it is. So you have single family residential, single family conversion. So if you take a single family home, you segment it out into apartments, that's identified. Some big things here. 55% of the parcels are single family. It only makes up 26% of the acres. So you have a whole lot of individual houses, but it's a very small area. And I'm gonna look at my screen to make sure I get these numbers correct. Multifamily makes up only 5% of the parcels, 6% of the total acreage. There's 76 vacant parcels in the neighborhood, which is almost 5% of the neighborhood. So that's a lot. There are blocks that you drive down and they're vacant. So you can look at that as a bad thing. There's also a lot of opportunity in that as well. So just kind of how you look at it. And then the office and medical services. It makes up 35% of the neighborhood. Some of that is looking at some of the survey results. I think there's kind of a mixed feelings about it. I know historically, the hospitals have kind of started to creep away from their initial footprints. There have been single family homes that have been lost, some of that integrity of the neighborhood. So making sure you keep that, part of this is talking to the hospital. Do you have any long-term plans to expand? We don't want to see that, especially if it's for parking. So that's something else that we want to identify. There's also a lot of parking in this neighborhood, which makes sense with all of the office uses, the hospitals, everything like that. Multifamily apartments. Okay, kind of touched on this already. The next 4 slides you're going to see are the same condition maps as back there. So the darker the color, generally the worse the condition. The way these are done is we go in and we divide up areas into blocks. So this doesn't mean that any single property is dragging things down. If you have 20 properties, one of them is like, that's a really bad one, that block can still be sound. So don't look at this and think of that one individual property and say, well, that doesn't seem right, because it's really about the whole block and not necessarily individual properties for this. But you start to get a lot of properties that are dilapidated or are having issues, and that's when you start to get the darker colors here. So the image on the left, that was from the 2003 plan. The one on the right, you may or may not have seen me. I've been walking around inventorying single family properties for deficiencies, purely exterior. There's a lot of the same things you can see. Part of that's just investment in a community. Again, we're seeing appraised values go up, but there's still deficiencies that we identified. Those deficiency lists can be found on our website in any of the neighborhood plans. There will be one here. One area I'd like to call out just as something to pay attention to, and this is again something the steering committee will have to focus on, the west part of the neighborhood. So that was all considered sound, so few deficiencies. In 2003, it's been 22 years, so you're starting to see some areas where there's minor deterioration. Part of, I think, what that steering committee needs to help guide, is it a priority to focus on an area and make sure it doesn't slip further, or do you want to focus on areas that are already in the most need moving forward? Owner occupancy. There isn't a great way to explain this one. There isn't a great logic for why certain blocks have changed. That's purely private ownership of things. In 2003, there was a 61% owner occupancy in this neighborhood. Now we're looking at 51% for single family homes. So there's been a decline. There are still blocks that are sound. The scale down here, so these have also changed, which makes things complicated. Part of that is to keep with standards across the city and what we're using for other neighborhoods. We don't want to compress things down and all of a sudden, hey, if your block clears 50%, you're doing great owner occupancy wide, when that's not what the rest of the city is experiencing, because then that's kind of trying to portray a better picture than what is actually being seen out there. So just something to consider. There are blocks that were on the left image that are no longer really housing. That's why they've been removed, whether it's a parking lot, something like that. But owner occupancy is a tough one. Owner occupancy generally across the city is kind of on a decline as well. So just something to consider. Crime. This is one that comes from the Topeka Police Department. We map all of the crime that they have in their database for 2023 and 2024. We plot those points, and that is how those get associated into those blocks. Kind of similar to 2003, there are some blocks that are having more issues than others. A lot of those blocks where you see a darker color, there's a higher intensity use, whether it's multifamily, whether it's commercial, whether it's a hospital where they may just have more foot traffic. So part of that can kind of be explained away. I know that crime is one that is always interesting to talk to the neighborhood at a more in-depth scale, where they have to take a report, there has to be a log of it. So it's a little bit different. I know from other neighborhoods we've worked in before, they're like, I can just tell you this is not what we experienced. This block is worse or better than what you were reflecting here. So that's part of this as well when we talk through this. Infrastructure conditions. So this includes pavement, curb and gutter, and sidewalks. There was not a map for this in 2003, so that is why there's not an image on the left side, or a previous image. So there is a large amount of what we would consider historic infrastructure east of Washburn. So stone curbs, brick sidewalks, or streets that are paved but have a lot of potholes, and then when you look in that pothole, you're like, there's brick under there. So those are all things that we take account of when we inventory this, but it's also a consideration and something we'll ask that steering committee when you go to spend funds. Do you value historic infrastructure? Is that something you want to see remain in the neighborhood, or is it more of a benefit to address more streets with a cheaper option than redo a brick street? So these are part of the things when we talk about that steering committee that you will kind of help guide that process and help develop what is the long-term goals for this neighborhood. Most of the residential blocks are going to fall into a major or intermediate defects. Is bad pavement. A lot of the brick sidewalks are, there's so many waves that one thing you have to consider is ADA compliance, whether someone could take a wheelchair or if you're on crutches. It's not easy to do that. A lot of the stone curb and gutters, if they are even there, they're in terrible shape. But is that a priority? I looked at the survey. I know some of you took previously. Curb and gutter wasn't a high priority. So when we go for an unfunded projects list, maybe that's something we put in there as like hey, we got a bunch of other things to worry about. Let's keep that at the bottom. And if we, in 7-10 years, whatever can apply for those, we'll do that. But this is kind of where we're at now. So we're doing pretty good on time. We're gonna take, I have 5 minutes on each, but we will let this go kind of as long as necessary. This is gonna be 3 brainstorming sessions for the neighborhood. This is gonna kind of follow a SWOT style. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunity, and threats. We are not going to put threats in there. We are gonna kind of keep that with the weaknesses and go from there. So we're gonna have topics that are gonna come at the top of the page. I'm gonna exit out of this presenter mode and take these down handwritten, so I'm gonna apologize for my spelling ahead of time, but we are going to go to this slide. Whoops. Okay, so the first one for the brainstorming session. What is one thing you want to preserve about Historic Oldtown? So this is where we're talking about those strengths. What are the things you value? What do you want to preserve in the neighborhood in the long term? And this is open forum. If you want to raise your hand, if you want to yell things out, whatever works best for you guys. Yes.
I would say some of the more classic architectural styles and things that have the older Topeka character. So that way, when there's tourism or more commercial growth, it will still have that authentic feel.
Thank you. Yes.
I personally like the medical corridor staying where it is and not expanding. Just for me, with accessibility issues, if it's all hither or yonder, it's harder to get to.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I like the tree specifically around where I live. I really like having their shade there. I know that the city recently went through and cut down a couple, but I like the shade.
And I know that that's always tough too, depending on where trees are located. Some of those are really great trees that are really mature, but then you look at it, and that's part of the reason in some areas why the sidewalk is in such bad shape. So there's give and take there, but again, that's great, and I think that that more people talk about kind of the heat island stuff. So having shade is always a great thing, especially when you're walking. So, yes.
Well, on that note, while many of the sidewalks are semi-dilapidated, we have sidewalks. We have pretty good coverage on the sidewalks throughout the neighborhood. And not all neighborhoods in Topeka have sidewalks. If you have a dog and you want to walk, I walk on streets.
Absolutely. And I will say, we can kind of hop around, because I feel like sometimes these bleed over whether it's a strength or a weakness or an opportunity, makes you think of something else, so we can hop around too. But if anybody has anything else they want to throw out.
Yeah, sometimes, like this is more in Ward Meat District area, but sometimes our sidewalks, along the sidewalks conversation, they just get like swallowed by grass. And then so, this is more of a question, so are individual citizens allowed to help others with that? Can we just shovel it up? Or is it like a city, because when I was working on bricks, I had to get city to work on that. They said I couldn't do it myself, even though I'm good with brickwork and stuff. So I'm just thinking, are we allowed to just help someone with when the sidewalk gets completely eaten up by the kind of like sod and grass?
I would say, generally speaking, as long as you have that property owner's approval, yes. So sidewalks are kind of this weird area where a lot of times they're located in the right of way, but they're the responsibility of the property owner. Especially with those brick sidewalks, takes a lot of maintenance and care to keep that in an ADA compliant or even, manageable environment. So if the property owner is like, yeah, absolutely, please help me with this, there's no issue from the city side of it with that happening.
Got it, but the changing the brickwork is.
As far as, what do you mean exactly?
Like if you wanted to, like you're not allowed to just repair the brickworks or the brick sidewalks yourself. I found that out when I, anyway, that's a minutia thing, we'll get into that
So,
later.
yeah, that's probably Public Works and Engineering,
Yeah.
and they are definitely gonna be, so if you are signing up for the steering committee, they will be at least 2 meetings, potentially more. So there will be an opportunity to talk to them face to face about that, and if you don't plan on signing up, so there's no pressure for that, feel free to shoot me an email. It was on that notice everybody received. Send that to me directly, and I will make sure that question gets to the appropriate party. Okay. We can go back.
This will be real quick. I like the fact that the commercial is very clearly delineated away from like the inner neighborhood portions, and I'd like to keep it that way to the greatest extent possible.
So, touching on that, that's part of the future land use when we go in and identify those things. It's, if you have a zoning change which would allow for a use to creep over in the neighborhood, one of the considerations is the future land use map. And so if it's not identified for a commercial or an office, that kind of helps preserve the integrity of the housing and other things within the neighborhood. Yes?
Kind of sentimental, but I like the fact that the residential areas, in how compacted they are, it is much easier to interact with your neighbors, so it's not so isolating.
So I'm gonna put density in there, because part of that is when you have homes that are closer together, the smaller side setbacks, that's part of it as well. But I think what you're getting at is kind of that old school neighborhood feel, where you know your neighbors, you're willing to talk to them, they're willing to talk to you. I know
You're
it's
not like hiding from each other as you're bringing in the groceries. There's, oh no, a communication.
Yes. I'm actually gonna throw that on a different line, because I feel like there's two really different points there. Yeah?
I think it's critical to make sure, I think Topeka High is not leaving, but wanting to make sure that the private schools are able to feel at home, continue to feel at home going in the future, as well as the churches, because I think they're important anchors to the neighborhood. So preserving their spaces to the best of our ability.
You could see that for some of the restaurants in the area too, or food places.
Oh, this is the word that always gets me, so you guys are all gonna get to see that.
You got it. Not the hospital cafeteria.
Okay, if we have any others that come up in this process, like I said, we can hop back and forth here. So what is one thing you would fix or change about Historic Old Town? So, weaknesses, and yes.
The sidewalks. I'd say this is someone who I have to get around without a car. It is hard in a lot of areas. Like Morgan here mentioned, the trees are wonderful. They do very much mess up the sidewalks, and I think it's important to stay on top of that. Because I know how hard it is for me with just a walker or sometimes my cane. I can't even imagine how hard it is with a wheelchair. And like, it's even worse during the winter, because a lot of people do not shovel their sidewalks.
After walking the street can be dangerous.
Yeah. Also illegal. You have to commit a crime if you want to go to a doctor's appointment.
Well,
Few blocks
and,
away.
yeah, if someone's trying to get by on a scooter on a brick road, it could be very dangerous.
Also the tree overgrowth, like if you're walking on a sidewalk and it's in between the road and the sidewalk, the trees are just overgrown, like you're either ducking or walking your dog in the street.
I've seen that more with bushes. People that just leave their bushes to sprawl out, and it's just like, why?
Yes.
I would just recommend checking the safety lighting for nighttime walking, especially in the areas that, kind of connect with the multiple maps of the crime and the population density, is verifying that there's enough lighting for people to get home safely or get where they need to be to transportation.
That's a great point. We had some spooky interactions when walking at night a while back.
I think another part of that goes to landlords that own a property that aren't in Topeka proper, and there's nothing you can do about the property when the landlord won't call you back. And that just brings all the other things to that area. Even when there's other people in that area trying to do everything they can to keep their own properties up and keep them safe.
Right.
I want to make a note concerning the lighting issue. A lot of times, the tree covers, which we all love, no one is disagreeing that they mess up sidewalks, but we love our trees.
Yep.
They also tend to have the tree foliage underneath the height of the street lights. And so when we talk about lighting, we're not just talking about the number of street lights that need to be in a given block, but also, do we need some lower level lighting along walkways and so on that actually serves a practical purpose for pedestrians?
I lived in Northampton, Pennsylvania with a historic Main Street, and they had a great effect with low-level fake lanterns, essentially. So lantern posts.
Yes.
One of the things that I noticed weakness-wise, the zoning's got the medical right down the middle, which separates the west from the east, but we have the strength aspect of the 8th Street corridor. There's no connectivity between east side and the west side availability.
Yeah, you have to walk around the medical buildings.
Yes.
I want to second the brick road concern, but in a different way. We've got part of the brick road on our street, and there's like this massive pothole that we have to drive by to and from to get to our place. I think the brick roads are cool, but if it's a question of like spending more money to do better upkeep on the brick roads versus like a different competing sorrow, I'm not that big of a fan of the brick roads.
Okay.
I would say another weakness is like the degradation of the alleys, especially the ones that get a lot of traffic. They're one of the very last things to get fixed. And when they do, the pothole fixes don't last. And so many people use those instead of the roads.
Not to mention the people that are just walking off the alleys onto the property. The number of things we had stolen before we got a security system.
So I'm gonna wrap that. Sorry, I'm gonna wrap that into crime generally and tie that to the alleys there, where, and I'm sure there's a couple things that tie into that. So we've talked a lot about lighting in alleys, and I just want to make this point clear. So I'm taking all of this down. These things can be incorporated in the plan. That does not always mean that the city has the ability to make some of these changes, but things change over time. So if we can incorporate this into a plan and have a document that supports the needs and desires of the neighborhood, that's what's important about this. So I just want to kind of make sure the expectations don't get set too high that like, hey, we can write this down and it's going to change things right now or here in the near future, but having documentation and things from the neighborhood really helps in the long term. So
You gotta plant the seed.
yes.
Land amongst the stars and all that.
You had something, sir.
Yeah, I put down for the alleys, I probably just be calling in terms of just landscaping of easements, in the alleyways. My alley is a regular obstacle course in terms of trying to dodge neighbors use it as a dumping ground for tree limbs and trash. You got it, trash cans. It's horrible.
So part of this also is going to be,
That's where my truck is picked up in the alley.
It's ours too.
is, you know,
The neighbors is on the ground.
if there's specific areas, write it on the document. We'll see.
Yeah, I've got it.
Perfect.
It definitely doesn't help that when the trash people do come through the alleys, they tend to, throw the, trash cans that are in there and break them up.
Do you have another one, sir?
Yeah, code compliance. What's up with mowing yards and picking up stuff? Burned out houses that sit there, boarded up houses that sit.
That kind of ties into the absentee landlord.
Oh, God. Some houses are trying to be fixed up, but they really should just be torn down, I think.
And so, again, this is also kind of we'll have this in a specific meeting. If you have questions, feel free to reach out. Renee Creaky, she's not here tonight. She is with our Housing Services Division. So there is a voluntary demolition plan as well. So if, again, absentee landlords, that makes that a little bit difficult to get those communications. But there is something the city has that tries to encourage these really dilapidated properties that are probably beyond saving to let's demo it. So
Do we have any green spaces?
yes.
We have no Shawnee County Parks and Rec maintained green spaces. We do have, so that right of way on 8th between Buchanan and Lincoln, that is technically Shawnee County Parks and Rec maintained. I know, it's, yeah.
Okay.
So we also have a privately maintained space at the east end of the neighborhood by the Grace Episcopal Episcopal Diocese of Kansas. They have about 3 acres that they maintain, but it's privately held. So it's not so we do not pay into it. They are, by the kindness of their heart, just allowing neighbors to come and use the space as they would like to. So we don't currently have anything that we can just enjoy for the purposes of enjoyment. That is taxpayer funded.
I was also kind of wondering if we could do like tomato plants or growing food.
We
Great.
do have some spaces for that.
Grace Episcopal Church would welcome any of you to enjoy the green space. I go to church there.
Well, and Trinity Lutheran has had a garden. I'm not sure the status of it this year, but they've had a neighborhood garden that people can come from the neighborhood and have a spot in their garden. We did that many, many years.
Well, they're informal green spaces, like the St. Francis properties, areas that used to have homes that were knocked down and they've not developed them. People actually do use them. Kids will go kick balls around. They're their property. I'll be honest, they don't seem to care about them that much, so that's a whole other issue, but they are, at least on the west side.
So we will invite County Parks and Rec to one of the steering committee meetings, and it'll be an interesting conversation, because I know there's a desire from the neighborhood side to have a formal park space. The county has to figure out how all of that fits into their park master plan, where it goes, property acquisition, all of that stuff. So they will be invited. You will absolutely have an opportunity to talk to someone from Shawnee County Parks and Rec about this. And then I wanted to touch on this. So I handle community gardens. Anything that is what we consider a vacant property requires a community garden permit. It's a $50 one-time fee. If it's a vacant lot, we require the property owner to have authorized it. So I realize that there's a lot of vacant space. You kind of run into the same issue where if it's an absentee landlord, but in a different sense of it's a vacant parcel that they are not utilizing. But if there's vacant land and you can get the property owner to sign off on it, reach out to me. We'll get going on that community garden process so we can figure out if that's something you want to pursue. If there is a land use on the property, so if there is a home, then we consider that an accessory garden. There's no permit, so you can have a really large lot where it was originally a 25-foot lot that was platted way back when, and now some of these are 4 or 5, so you have a 125-foot lot. There's a home on one of those lots, but all of it's owned by the same property owner. That's just an accessory garden. So feel free to reach out. I realize that's a lot of words and kind of technical and not super clear, but feel free to reach out if you are interested in pursuing one of those.
Would you have recommendations for how to locate the property owner? Because I don't think all of us here would know that.
Property valuation.
Yeah, so there is a publicly available information from the county appraiser. I think that's probably about the extent of what I should give for information there, but.
One thing on that parks, we understand that they were trying to maybe donate some land by Cara Paraville for a park, and right there where they used it for a parking lot, and that there was no, I'm not sure what the right word is, but the people with Parks and Rec were not in favor of trying to help that plan move along.
Okay.
So I wonder why, since we didn't have a park in our whole area, and maybe Shamika can tell us again, I can't remember the reason why.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Oh, I didn't quite, so it's a giant parking lot?
Well, it is now.
Yes.
They owned the land there on Buchanan, south of their school. And they talked about trying to have that land where the houses had been torn down become a park. And they wouldn't approve it.
Right.
So they ended up building their parking lot there, the school did. But at some point there was talk about it possibly being a park.
So the short portion, and if you join the steering committee, I'll tell you the whole story, is that that part of there was not enough land for Shawnee County Parks and Rec to feel that they could turn it into a park. We need at least 5 lots at least in order to do that. And the problem was we didn't have 5 lots together.
You had 4 along there.
Yeah, so. And they wanted, Cara Paraville wanted part of it for their parking, and so that's why. But I will give you the whole story if you join the steering committee.
And I think part of this, excuse me, is when you have the opportunity to sit down with Parks and Rec face to face, you can get a better understanding of some of their reasons why. I know it oftentimes just comes off as, and it sounds like no, and without understanding the process, it's like, okay, well that seems like that all makes perfect sense. Adding some context about the number of lots. So, but I think there's also an element of when you're trying to think in the long term, again, that's part of what the comprehensive planning side of things is with the city. It's thinking long term, figuring out how to get into that parks master plan or how to get onto a budget for them in the future. So again, it's not a super quick answer, and I wish it was, but it's a different, organization there. So yes.
Well, the question that comes to my mind listening to, and I'm sorry I walked in a little late, so I didn't get Sharika's statement that she just made. She stated as irrevocable fact that there has to be 5 lots in order for the Parks and Rec to have interest. Now, I'm familiar with that area. I owned one of those houses that was knocked down until the early 1990s. Believe me, it didn't need to be knocked down when I owned it, but it may or may not have when it was. But I know the variance in the sizes of those lots, and what I have to ask is why we accept at face value, gotta be 5 lots. Where is the process involved here in challenging some of those issues and saying, hey, Parks Department, we think in this instance, these 4 lots really should have been enough?
I don't have a single answer to why, and that is because parks are Shawnee County. If I had an answer, I would love to tell you. But that's again part of it. So getting my call.
So you might try talking to the commissioner that represents your area.
Kevin Cook.
And maybe they can influence policy, park policy. They probably do plan updates too, I imagine, but that's just a suggestion.
So I would say that a desire for parks is something that goes back to the 2003 plan. If you go through and read talks about the population, what some of the recommendations, excuse me, at the time were for green space for that density of population. Here we are 20 plus years later, that still hasn't happened. So this is something, like I said, it's long term. Some things have changed in those 20 years as far as how Parks and Rec have been managed and everything there. So, but the goal, get in a room, try and understand some of those processes. That way, if something does come up, and it makes a harder no if you have 5 lots in the future, to understand why some of those no's can happen. And that's all I can say about parks, because I don't know anymore. Any other weaknesses? Are we ready to move on to our next slide? Yes.
It's not something that affects me in particular, but I am aware of how it affects the community. There are only accessible crosswalks, say with audible and with tactile curbs, just around the library and some parts of the medical area, and nowhere else in the community.
That was something I noticed as I walked the sidewalks, is a lot of the current ADA compliant crosswalks with the truncated domes or whatever they call them.
That's what they call them.
Yep. Those are not in place, or they're in such bad shape and they're not the modern one, or they don't exist there. So, or if there is one, it may lead into a sidewalk that's not. So what good does that serve? So, you mentioned the audible, and then did you mention?
Well, if I may comment on that, I have been involved with several centers for independent living over the years. I've been employed by them. I've lived in this neighborhood since 1981. And my experience with the efforts to improve pedestrian accessibility have been that it is such a major problem that the piecemeal approach in addressing it is simply not practical. I have seen numerous situations where intersections have been redone and the detectable warnings are put in properly. The sidewalks are in accordance with ADAG regulations or ADAG recommendations, but they connect with sidewalks which make it absolutely impossible for anyone with an orthopedic disability to utilize any of those accessible features that have been put in. And I almost have come to feel that it doesn't make any sense to approach accessibility in a piecemeal manner, because you're really not providing access per se to anything.
Absolutely. And so I want to touch a little bit on some of that. Our Public Works Engineering Department, I know that there are standards they meet or are looking into when they look for different types of crosswalks. The ADA compliant stuff, that's a different animal there. That's stuff that can be put into the implementation section of this plan and then applied for however the committee decides to prioritize that. That can be a top priority. That can be something where it's like everybody sits in a room, it's a top priority right now, and then it's like, well, actually, we would like to focus on streets and then see how everything flushes out there. So they have standards, and Public Works will be at one of those meetings that can hopefully provide some more input to how or why some of those decisions are made, the piecemeal, or whether or not the neighborhood decides to approach a more fluid section that kind of is contiguous with, you know, full channels up, down, east, west, everywhere throughout the neighborhood. Yes?
You talked about sidewalks and alleys, but where I live, it's all gang members, drug dealers, prostitution, drive-bys, and that's all I have.
Thank you. I think you said one more, and I honestly did not catch it.
Drive-bys. I do one quick note. So, I know we're talking about historic Old Town, but this goes for all of Topeka. If you find anything specific where you could drop a map kind of pin on it, a intersection or whatnot, there's a website called See Click Fix that the city of Topeka does monitor. And I actually used it to identify a kind of a hairy turn that I was like, hey, you might want to analyze this turn to see if it should be a protected left or whatnot. And they actually changed it to be a protected left. And I was blown away by that. I'm like, wow, this actually works. So if you kind of approach it in a professional way and aren't like super like complaining about it, how you type it on the website, they will actually respond to it. It takes a little bit of time, but it might be a way to get things done in parallel with these other objectives. But just a suggestion.
Could the steering committee get a litany of those complaints over time to review during their process?
I don't have an exact answer for that, and I don't deal directly with See Click Fix, but that is something I could look into and see who.
You can go online and look at it in the area. You can see what people have turned in, and you can see what the status is of whatever the complaint was on a whole map.
I think it sends alerts too. If you put one in that same area, it'll tell you that somebody else did too.
Okay. Free aggregation of a heat map for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So that seemed like a transition point to some opportunities. Again, if there's any strengths or weaknesses that were listed, we can put back and forth. So if there's opportunities for any of the others, go right ahead. Yes?
I'm sorry, I've got one more weakness.
You're good.
I don't mean to be loud.
No worries.
Doesn't really affect me because I don't drive, but I know it affects a lot of people, including Morgan here. Lots of streets just straight up don't get plowed during winter. That means you can't get out of your driveway. Or for the people who, it does affect me in this way, for the people who have to go off the sidewalk into the street to move, we're kind of, not able to do anything.
It just be fixable because people park in the streets, and so literally our cars would be either snowed in our driveways if we have them, or just all full on snowed in. Luckily, we've got people who have trucks who drive up and down. I've noticed have to get down as best they can, but it's really no easiness around.
Do the alleys experience the same issue?
Yeah. This year was really bad. I couldn't get on the street even my
Any opportunity? Yes.
I think one thing that we're missing maybe in our neighborhood, because we have so much medical, is that there should be more communication between our neighborhood and people within the medical, of what their plans are, and between both the hospitals, and maybe involvement in our neighborhood, since there's not much, at least when I was helping with the NIA, not much of any, they don't communicate with us or anything, and I think that that's a missed opportunity, that they ought to, that we're right there and we're,
Their changes directly impact you, and if you know what they're planning for, that can either make things easier, or you can help advocate for the neighborhood in that way.
They barely
That's a good point.
talk to patients. I found out that my monthly infusions were being moved from just around the corner to almost a mile away, and I found that out 2 days before my next infusion.
So part of my goal is to try and figure out who some of those folks are with the hospitals, or they have so many satellite offices there as well, and figure out what the long-term plan is. Is there one person? Are they here? Can we sit down and talk to them? Are they open to meeting with the neighborhood? Is this something where, if nothing else, I can pass along Shamika's information and start to build those relationships, so there is a little bit more coordination there? Because, you can go look at historical maps, and there's been a lot of homes that have been lost, and now you look at parking lots that are empty, and I know things changed 5 years ago where a lot less people were going in, but now there's just there's a loss of homes that was really part of what drove the neighborhood success. So
Like they at one point, I think, thought that they could try to maybe just shut that one way, but it's like, that's a major road.
Right.
You know, so then what we've heard is maybe they want to build something that they walk across on that road, you know, and I'm not sure if they'll do that, but I think we don't know either. It'd be nice to have a better idea of what they plan.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something that hopefully we can foster that relationship a little bit over the coming months here.
Maybe some of the property where they're tearing stuff down would be big enough for a green space. That would benefit hospital and medical employees, but everybody in the neighborhood. Stormont's constantly razzing buildings in that area and moving stuff around and.
Again, St. Francis has empty lots. If you drive this like 600 block of Jewel, that's just all owned by the hospital, barely maintained.
Yeah.
I so second your comment, because I feel like the hospital is a big thing here. It hasn't been, it's been contentious at times with them. But like, I'm not sure they see us as their neighbor. We live with him as their neighbor.
Right.
And like, I think it may come down to really bringing, even in, yes, let's go to the top, but like, hey, could we get the security guys that drive around? Like, what are they seeing? You know, like, how do we kind of be more of a team together?
Yeah.
And, you know, without it just being like us versus them. I think there's opportunities. And like, to the person, like, I do that, guys. Like, I call St. Francis and like, hey, you know, I have or something else. And they're like, oh, we were on it. And like, they do. They like come over. But it's just because like, I'm the person who's going to do it, you know? But there's plenty of people that they don't know what to do. There's apathy, frustration, so, but also opportunity with them.
I see the neighborhood has such great opportunity for growth because of the hospitals.
Yes.
You know, for the elderly people, I'm getting elderly. I live out Parker. And wouldn't it be nice if we had nice housing there that would draw people in to live closer to the hospitals? It could be such a benefit. I do. Yeah, there you go.
I think realtors are another possible, just like we're just kind of naming parties out there, like working with realtors, getting, I told this to my husband before our meeting, I get so frustrated when I read real estate listings and they are like not selling our neighborhood and it has all this, I mean, I just like want to call them up, like, can I write that for you? You know, because it's like, hey, we've got, like you mentioned, amazing architecture, all this great stuff, these airplane bungalows, all this cool stuff, and you know, it's like, help us sell our neighborhood. Whether it goes to be a rental house that's owned by, you know, that has a nice family in it or whatever, it doesn't all have to be a homeowner occupied everything, but we need that. And such that engagement is there to wait.
It was actually really exciting that housing was brought up because that was one that I didn't want to pry, but there's, you know, vacant land, lot opportunity, how that stuff gets rehabilitated or it's past rehabilitation, what can be replaced there. That's not, vacant land can be two things. It can be an eyesore or it can be a great opportunity. It's just really how you frame it and make sure that it doesn't become a dumping ground, it becomes something beautiful that's an asset to the neighborhood. Have his hand first and I'll come right over here to you.
Okay, I'm going to write down a little bit. Opportunity to say middle housing, considering what the market's doing right now, there's an opportunity there. But I know inserts city codes and compliance there.
And missing middle housing is something that planning is looking into. R2 zoning, what are the advantages? So there is a smaller side setback, there's a smaller front setback, there's leeway there, but that's opportunity. I mean, I know there's a block that's fairly recently vacant, I believe used to have a church or a community center on it, but you know, that's a lot of land,
Are you talking along Polk?
Yes.
That was a church for when it burned.
Yes.
So one thing that was mentioned was gangs and just overall crime. And one thing that happens is that if youth don't have something constructive to do with their time, they're going to innovate and find leaders themselves instead of having trusted members of the community and adult leaders to kind of help them. So if there's going to be more green spaces and then potentially growing urban gardens, then maybe some of the spaces can be used as ancillary farmers markets where the kids can get experience making $1 by either volunteering at the farmers market or a support farmers market, maybe a little smaller than a major one, so people can kind of combat these extreme food prices that we're experiencing, and then the kids can have something safe and fun to do where they can gain some skills.
I want to back up for just a moment and talk about the communication issues with Stormont Vale. It definitely got my attention a few years ago when Stormont Vale bought the house and lot right next door to my home, which has been my home for 38 years. The house was demolished, and we received absolutely no communication from Stormont Vale. I was working second shift at the time, and I knew the house was being demolished for sure when I was awakened in the early morning by all the heavy equipment knocking the house down. Our neighbor who had lived there had been an absolutely artistic lawn keeper. He had wonderfully sculpted bushes. They simply ripped all of those out, ripped the house down. No communication with us as to whether we might have wanted to rescue some of those landscapings that he had done. This was an older gentleman who had had a stroke. And when I contacted Stormont Vale, it did indeed take forever to get to anyone who could tell me anything about it, and I never really got a satisfactory answer. They did talk with me about whether we were going to soon be ready to sell our property. And I said, well, okay, I got a 4-bedroom house here with a 3-car garage and a hot tub on the patio and a nice rec room in the back. You're going to need to pay me what the fair market value of that property would be in another part of town. And you know, I haven't heard a thing from them since.
Yeah, that's, I mean, that seems like a story where you would just watch, you know, like I said, you can go through the aerials and just watch as whole blocks were disappeared for either vacant or parking or some sort of expansion, so yeah, it's unfortunate when that happens, and, you know, I think there's a lot of fabric of the neighborhood that's been lost over time with that.
We could say though that I think our prior neighborhood plan did protect our neighborhood, because they were starting to be interested in possibly purchasing some on Lincoln. Yeah. And you know, the NIA said to them, you know, you cannot demolish these. This is the barrier is the alleyway there. So I think if we hadn't had that plan in place, I don't think we'd still have all the housing on Lincoln.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, part of the steering committee, future land use can be one of those things where it's like, oh, these are colors on a map, but that's a real life impact that had. And I believe that was identified as like a medical transition zone, which kind of drew that hard barrier to help preserve everything east of that. Yes?
I definitely love to see long-term fixes, like you said, with the potholes, and then you look into the bricks, maybe spinning more at one time to have it stay nicer for a longer period instead of making these small payments and then having to do it every year for fixing certain infrastructure when one large would fix it for much longer.
So that is, I'm going to provide a little context here, because we went through some of this conversation with Historic Holiday Park. They have a lot of streets that have brick underneath their road. They originally wanted to apply for and have a brick road reinstalled. They were like, this is going to be great, it can slow traffic. And this is where the steering committee comes in, because when we talked to our engineers and talked about what that was going to cost to have a new brick road installed, and you're looking at closer to $1 million for one block of pavement, and the alternative was we can mill and overlay 6+ blocks and then do some sidewalks and curb and gutter work. But those are the tough decisions. So there are other levels in between a mill and overlay and a brick road. There's, another reconstruction process there, but I think that's again I don't want to come to everybody in the end and say, here's what planning decided is best for this neighborhood. The goal is to have everybody involved. There's some ownership. You all can make those decisions for a shorter term fix or a long term fix that everybody's kind of comfortable with. Yes.
Can I just make a comment just to encourage everybody? As part of my study and preparation for running, I've spent the last 4 years attending these, and I've seen times where folks that live and have vested in skin in the game in this neighborhood or the neighborhoods that I've been attending, for instance, I saw one where folks were they were not attending. And so they attended the learning and everyone was shocked at what the public works and everybody had come to, because essentially if you guys don't go to every one of these sessions and join the steering committee and be informed about your NIA and what's going on and who you're, having that direct contact with your council person who can also just be your advocate. When that disconnect is there, for lack of participation, because everybody's, got families and stuff to do, then we end up with a shock and horror situation when it comes to them unveiling these projects and you guys did not get any say. So I just want to hammer that, please join your steering committee and please pay attention to who is going to be representing you, because you don't want to be surprised later on and none of your interests are represented. So I just wanted to hammer that home.
Okay, I have 3 things. Well, maybe 2. So I think that there's opportunity for us to come up to talk with businesses along Topeka Boulevard and 6th, and to some degree on 10th. I think there's opportunity for us as a neighborhood to work through some design ideas for maybe sprucing up those areas, since they are our borders. And right now, they're just kind of very indistinguishable, which kind of goes into my next point, which is that we have an opportunity to really delineate Old Town through whether it be, I know banners are a really big popular one, Museum of College Hill and where else? Chesney Park, along the Washburn Lane area, but I think there's some opportunities to really delineate Old Town that we just haven't had a chance to really address previously.
Do you guys have a sign, like a big old sign somewhere? We could start there. Yeah. Well,
There's some signage along 8th.
On 8th.
There's larger
go
stone
inside.
monument signs that are in the median and can be a little difficult to. I think there's a couple houses I've seen look like they have old monument signs that have been.
And talk to me if you would like one. We have 3.
Potentially. Yeah. It's I know where I'm at now, but.
Okay, let me just say, she did ask if we would like to, and she said I think that this is better for just neighbors to be present because it's a very personal kind of interaction. So please don't mistake absence for not caring. She did ask, but said
Karen Hiller.
It is, but.
Maybe you should announce it to the board.
Well, she did ask to come, but said that she wanted to make sure that neighbors got a chance to have their voices heard.
I was asking about our city council member, why she wasn't here, Karen Hiller, and that's why.
Yes.
So I wanted to piggyback one thing. You talked about being involved in the steering committee. That's important for the neighborhood plan development, but I think you also touched on it there. Being involved in the Neighborhood Improvement Association, and there's always energy up front. You'll maybe have a couple months where you get some more folks who are really invigorated in this process, and then 6 months it dwindles, a year it dwindles back down. But it's through your advocacy that Dreams One is in this neighborhood. So having someone to advocate for yourself, and sometimes there's power having multiple voices there. So I just wanted to kind of caveat that with that process as well. Steering committee, important. Long-term NIA.
I had someone ask me about what time commitment this gets involved with the steering committee?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's gonna vary. Because we're starting a little late, I would like to start having meetings in the next 2 or 3 weeks, which means, probably Monday, I'll have a survey tool put together that says, what time are people available? A lot of the times, evenings are what work best for people. If it's something where the day somehow works better, we'll figure it out. We'll get it. Yeah, it's tough to do meetings during the day. I think right off the bat, we're probably looking at a meeting every 2 or 3 weeks until we kind of get the group together, get everyone kind of establish what's going on, get Public Works in the room so we can start to have them talk about street projects, what that scope looks like. And then part of it's also, what does that steering committee want to hear from? Do we need to have a separate meeting where we have the community police officer who goes to those NIA meetings? Do we need to have them in the room for a face-to-face discussion about some of those things? They may hear from one group at the NIA meetings, but again, there's a larger representation here. Does code enforcement need to be there? So part of that's going to be how many meetings that committee decides they need. You don't have to go to all of them. I will let you know, kind of have an agenda for what those will be. If you can't be present, if you have questions or comments on an issue, you can always send those to me ahead of time. We'll make sure that those get, circulated around to the larger group. Email chain, whatever we need to do to kind of get those going. Meetings, 30 minutes to an hour. It's really going to depend on what that subject is. When we have Public Works in the room and they're talking about a specific treat and what that treatment is, and we're doing a neighborhood this large, that can run an hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on how in the weeds those folks want to get. When we get down to making those final decisions for projects, that may be a long meeting. The goal is that the ones in between, half hour, 45 minutes, that's kind of, yes.
Might be overstepping here, so I know my face right now. I think the online survey really probably helped a lot of people who aren't here communicate with that. Would it be possible to put something like that together for like the regular meetings? So that, people who can't necessarily make it in person can still show up for the community.
Yes, so I will just say the greatest issue with that, we sent out 1,200 mailers to the neighborhood. So that takes a lot of time to get that many envelopes of stuff and then sent back out to do that on a regular basis. That is our biggest barrier there. Now, if you're in this room right now and you have an email written back there and you would like a survey related to a specific topic, we can craft that, we can get those responses. If this is the group who's going to be invested in this process, it's a lot of extra time to send it to 1,100 additional people. But if you want email back there, we can start something where I send out a survey that way and try and get input more related to direct subjects to you all.
And Bryson, I was gonna say too, we may also have some things coming up very soon where we can help with some of that, especially if you're doing online surveys, a way to kind of promote that out a little bit more. We can also potentially work towards, putting a dedicated page or something out there. I have access to post things, of course, on Nextdoor. So, I think there's ways that we can maybe get an online survey out to the neighborhood that's kind of more ongoing, that helps.
And if you don't do digital surveys, give me a call. The neighborhood's like 10 blocks away from where we work, so it's not a big deal to drop a paper survey in your mailbox or door, whatever you prefer. So we can make that work. It's really just a matter of what is best for everybody and targeting that for the group. Yes.
So would it be possible when you do tear things down, or like you said, like the stones on the sidewalk or the brick roads or some of these old homes, to save some of those old supplies? Because some of the stuff's 100 years old. When you destroy it, it's gone. Like, especially some of the wood. I know people would love to make projects with that, or some of these old bricks that put in, just preserve it for the city.
So I don't have the answer for that. It's probably two different sets of folks we would need to talk to there. Our
But when we
engineering.
had previous times, the city does keep the bricks and take them.
Street department.
Right, and have a place where they're stored, and then we went and got some at different times when we were trying to help on a sidewalk there on 8th Street. that it had a fire there, and we were, some other people, we were involved in trying to help replace that sign a number of years ago. And then we were able to go get some of the bricks at a certain time.
I appreciate you providing that. I did not know that. I didn't know that it was something that was available, so I appreciate you
I
providing.
don't know that they're always available, but it worked in.
Yeah.
For that.
And so that's another one, when we have that meeting with engineering, we'll make sure to talk to them. What's that process? Is there a formal process? What does that look like? Try and talk to them. The other one's housing, with that older wood. I don't know how they deal with tearing things down and things like that, what the salvaging process is. I truly don't. So that would be a conversation with Renee, who again is with our housing services. I don't know if she has the answer, but we'll at least get the right folks in the room to try and get some answers there.
Bryson,
Yes.
put that in an opportunity.
Thank you. Got one? Yes.
I'll let him go first.
Okay. Do you have something? No? Okay.
Two things. One, as a kind of addition to what the gentleman 2 seats in front of me said. In addition to, say, a farmer's market, we could also do artisan markets as well as an alternative that would keep kids engaged. And secondly, I think, because we had been on the context of communication for a little bit, I think there is great potential for individual blocks to grow and communicate with each other if given the right impetus, the spark to the fire, essentially. I feel like communities would definitely come together and be stronger if that communication was encouraged, instead of just as a by-the-side happenstance.
One thing that Shamika works with quite a bit with that already is the Night Out Against Crime. If you go to that, she brings lots of people together in the whole area with that. It's a good opportunity to meet all the people in the neighborhood.
Watch your mailbox. Get more information on that soon.
Do you send that to the businesses that have properties in the area too?
Not traditionally. We do need to go through our mailing list and do some updates because tear downs have happened and whatnot. It's really expensive, and so we tend to focus on the places that are homes as opposed to buildings and commercial type properties, but those are things that we can add.
Would social media be a way to extend the notice without exhibiting?
So we have a Facebook group page.
Okay.
Just look up Historic Oldtown NIA. It's a group page. It's not a page, but if you get with me afterwards, I'll be happy to show you where it's at.
Are people that, like, can I join?
Anybody can join. You don't have to be within the neighborhood to join.
I do not have anything else besides a slide that says, don't forget to be part of the discussion and sign up if you would like to after we've made this pitch. Is there any final questions, things for me? Thank you all for being here. This is a big first step. I look forward to working with some of you moving forward in this process, but I appreciate your time. An hour and a half on a Thursday is not an easy thing. So I appreciate it, and thank you all for being here. If you have any questions, reach out to me. We'll figure out who to get you in contact if that person's not me. Thank you.